The NBA trade deadline is coming up, and there's a bunch of different trade rumors going around the NBA. So let's look at 5 different potential trades that should go down before the deadline. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, please consider hitting that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics.
I think it's pretty clear that the Indiana Pacers are going in the direction of a total rebuild. Especially after the trade of Caris LeVert, I think it just made it even more obvious in what direction they're heading. And due to that reason, I think the Indiana Pacers need to trade Miles Turner. And it isn't necessarily due to his actual play on the court. I think everybody knows he's a very talented player, of course fantastic defender, has the ability to space the floor offensively, but it's more so due to the issue that after this season, you're going to have to at least make the decision on whether you want to pay him or not long term. And for a team that's rebuilding, obviously you don't want to pay a guy in Miles Turner long term, and you want to build through the draft. So I think the Pacers certainly should at the very least look to trade Miles Turner at this trade deadline, and I think they are. And a potential trade I could see going down is the Charlotte Hornets getting Miles Turner and Jeremy Lamb, and the Indiana Pacers getting Gordon Hayward and a first-round pick in return. So first, let's talk about the Indiana Pacers and the upside for them. So of course, they unload Miles Turner, which would be a positive for them, getting rid of that contract, and in return, they would be getting a guy in Gordon Hayward who certainly doesn't have a great contract, but I see a guy like that as someone they just have on the roster either as a veteran for some of the young guys or as a guy that they would potentially cut down the road. But the real reason why they would make this trade is for that first round pick. So now you're getting a guy that you probably would not have signed long term anyway, and you're getting a first round pick in return for him. So I think that certainly would be a positive for the Pacers. And for the Hornets perspective, now they're getting a guy in Miles Turner that could really help out their defense, as well as really space the floor out for a guy like LaMelo Ball and let him do his work. Miles certainly would be a very valuable piece for the Hornets and also certainly would help them in the playoff hunt. And overall, I just think it's a win-win for both sides. So now let's get on to the next trade. So the next trade is going to involve the Detroit Pistons and the Chicago Bulls. So it's pretty clear that both of these teams are on complete opposite paths at the moment. The Pistons are obviously in a rebuild mode and want to get as many young players and draft picks as possible, and the Bulls are in the complete opposite. They're in win now mode and trying to get as many good players they could and get players that would give them the best opportunity to win right now. And historically, when two teams are in complete opposite situations, they make trades that are beneficial to both sides, and I think this is another one of those examples if it were to go down. So the Pistons would receive Kobe White, Patrick Williams, and Troy Brown and a first round pick, and the Chicago Bulls would be getting Jeremy Grant. So let's first start with the Pistons. How do they benefit from this deal? So of course the most important thing is the Pistons will be getting some nice young talent to place around some of the other nice young players they have on the roster. When you talk about a guy in Kobe White, he was drafted pretty early a few seasons back, and maybe he hasn't necessarily exploded on the NBA scene and hasn't completely lived up to expectations due to injuries and some other factors, but still at this point I think a lot of people see Kobe White as a fantastic young talent and certainly as a guy with a ton of potential going forward. And when you talk about the other two guys in Patrick Williams and Troy Brown, both of those guys also have talent in my opinion, but also both of those guys haven't really lived up to expectations, and honestly both of them have been somewhat of a disappointment throughout their young NBA careers. But of course they're young guys and they can always turn it around, and when you're rebuilding you want as many young players and young talent as you possibly could have. And of course on top of all of that you get a first round pick, which is obviously the most important thing you can have as a rebuilding team. So I think it certainly makes a ton of sense for the Pistons. But now let's talk about Chicago. How do they benefit from this deal? Now I think a lot of Chicago Bulls fans as well as the Bulls as an organization really liked what Kobe White was able to do for them now and also his potential long term. But I think what Jeremy Grant provides to them right now, due to the fact that they're in win now mode, I think just provides a lot more value in my opinion. Of course when Jeremy Grant was playing with Denver with Jokic, Jamal Murray, and everybody else on that roster, he showed the ability to play as a third or fourth option on that team, and of course has the ability to space the floor pretty effectively, but also in Detroit he's proven the ability to score for himself as well. So I think he would provide a very versatile player for them. He he would probably be in the starting lineup where he would be able to space the floor for everybody and just give more room to guys like DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine to drive all the way to the basket, but also you can use him pretty effectively coming off the bench where he could be the #1 option. And I think that would help the Bulls significantly, especially when they go through some injuries like they're going through now, and just having another guy who can get 20 a game at will. And of course, defensively, he's a great defender as well. I just think adding a guy like Jeremy Grant to your roster in Chicago would certainly help them, especially when it comes down to the NBA playoffs. I just think it's a fantastic move for them. So now let's get on to the next trade. So the next trade is going to involve the Los Angeles Lakers and the New Orleans Pelicans. So it's been pretty clear early on into this season that the LA Lakers have certainly struggled pretty tremendously and have been one of the more disappointing teams this season. And especially one of the star players that they brought in free agency in Russell Westbrook has been struggling tremendously ever since he's gotten here, and now it seems like the Lakers just want to get rid of him. So in this deal, the Lakers would get Devontae Graham, Josh Hart, Tomas Satoransky, and Billy Hernan-Gomez, and the Pelicans would get Russell Westbrook and a first-round pick. So first, let's start with the Lakers. How does this deal benefit them? So I think the biggest part of this deal is obviously just getting rid of Russell Westbrook, because it's been pretty clear, as I mentioned, he's not fitting in well and just not playing well in general. So just getting him off the team, I think, in my opinion, at least would certainly be a benefit for this team. And just having the ball in LeBron's hands a lot more, spacing the floor a lot better, I just think it makes a lot of sense. And the actual players that they're bringing in Devontae Graham and Josh Hart, I think it certainly helped them out. Josh Hart will be going back to the Lakers, be a nice 3-and-D type player. Devontae Graham could be a guy coming off the bench and just being a spark plug for them offensively. I just think this is a pretty good deal for the Lakers. And now talking about it from the Pelicans perspective, of course you are bringing in Russell Westbrook and his humongous contract, which doesn't make a lot of sense for this team going forward. But at the same time, you are bringing in a guy who's established and could be a pretty good mentor to some of the younger guys they have on their team. But mostly the reason why you'd be doing this deal is to be getting that first-round pick. Now, because obviously going into the season, the expectations were a lot higher and they certainly disappointed pretty significantly, and they may go in the direction not of a complete rebuild, but maybe a retool. And if they were going to do that, getting a first-round pick would certainly help them out pretty significantly. And who knows, if Russell Westbrook could play a lot better for them in New Orleans, maybe he could benefit them as well. So I think this could be another one of those deals that really benefit both sides. So the next trade is going to involve the New York Knicks and the Sacramento Kings. So it's been pretty clear that this season the Knicks as a whole, and especially Julius Randle, have struggled very tremendously. I made a ton of videos on why he's struggling, if he could turn it around or whatever, but obviously it's been very clear that Julius Randle has been struggling significantly, and there's been a bunch of different trade rumors saying that the Knicks could potentially trade Julius either at the trade deadline or maybe during the offseason after the year ends. So in this trade offer, the Knicks would get De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley, and the Sacramento Kings would get Julius Randle, Alec Burks, Kemba Walker, and a first-round pick. So first, let's talk about the Sacramento Kings. How does this make sense for them? So obviously the Sacramento Kings just gave a huge contract extension to De'Aaron Fox his previous offseason. So many people would say, why would the Kings want to trade him so quickly? But the reason is, at least in my opinion, is because Davion Mitchell and Tyrese Halliburton have really been playing so well, and they value them over De'Aaron because clearly they have a point guard logjam. They value the other two guys more over De'Aaron because first of all, they're younger, they think they could potentially be better players, and also they're a lot cheaper, obviously, because the contract he just got. So I think it would be very enticing for them to trade away De'Aaron Fox and bring in a guy like Julius Randle, who clearly has a ton of talent. Of course, he has been struggling this season for the Knicks, but I think from the Kings' perspective, they think that he can turn it around with them, and I just think it would be very enticing for them. And of course, they get a first-round pick on top of that. So I think this deal would make a lot of sense for the Kings. But now let's talk about this deal from the Knicks' perspective. So of course, a lot of Knicks fans, and maybe even some people in the Knicks front office, do want to trade Julius Randle. Although his contract honestly really isn't that bad, the way he's been playing this season has obviously been a huge negative for the team and basically the reason why they're struggling so much. His attitude out there in the court also has not been all that great. Although I will say, to his credit, both his attitude and his play has been a lot better over the past 2 games. But overall, for the most of the season, it's been really bad. And a lot of people want to see RJ Barrett be the main guy in the team. So trading away Julius would be a positive, at least to a lot of people. And bringing in a guy in De'Aaron Fox would also be a positive because obviously he has the potential to be an all-star type talent. talent, and I think he's basically already at that point. He's not an all-star, but he's at that level of talent in my opinion. Also, the Knicks have been looking for a point guard basically for the last 20 or so years, so bringing in De'Aaron would certainly help that need as well. He's obviously super quick out there in the court. He's probably the quickest, if not one of the quickest players in the NBA. Just puts a ton of pressure on the defense once driving all the way to the basket. Of course, is a decent passer and playmaker. Does struggle from that three-point range, but of course he could improve it as the years progress. And overall, I think he would just be a very nice point guard for the Knicks to have long term. So the next and final trade offer is going to involve the Philadelphia 76ers and the Brooklyn Nets. So it's been pretty clear that Ben Simmons obviously is going to get traded from the Sixers soon, and of course doesn't want to be there. And also there's been a ton of reports recently saying that James Harden may potentially want to leave Brooklyn after the season ends, and potentially would want to go to a team like the Sixers, who have Daryl Morey there, who was his general manager in Houston for all those years and really loves James Harden, of course. So in this deal, the Philadelphia 76ers would get James Harden, and the Brooklyn Nets would get Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. So first, let's start with the 76ers. How does this deal make sense for them? So of course they're going to be acquiring James Harden and getting rid of Ben Simmons. I think it's certainly been a priority for them to get rid of Ben Simmons, but they've also made it pretty clear that they wouldn't get rid of him just to get rid of him. They need to get a really good return. And of course, getting a guy like James Harden, who's a proven superstar, would certainly be the right return for them. Of course, now you add an absolute superstar in Harden next to Joel Embiid, and the pick and roll or pick and pop that those two could potentially run in Philadelphia would be absolutely lethal and very scary for the rest of the NBA. And I think in terms of fit stylistically, James Harden would be an absolute perfect fit for the Sixers. I see absolutely no downsides for them, at least stylistically. Of course, they are losing a first-round pick, which wouldn't necessarily matter for them because they are competing, especially if they were to get James Harden. They are losing Matisse Thybulle, who they really like, but obviously you're not going to keep Matisse Thybulle over James Harden. So for the Sixers, I think this would be an absolute perfect deal for them. But now talking about it from the Nets perspective, honestly, I don't think it makes as much sense for the Nets as it does the Sixers, but at the same time, if James Harden was just going to leave in free agency anyway, you might as well try to get something for him. And this return would actually give them quite a bit, because in my opinion, I think Ben Simmons is severely undervalued at this point. What he provides offensively and defensively is certainly at a very high level in my opinion, and I think the fact that he wouldn't be able to shoot would be offset a lot better with guys like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant in Brooklyn than it was with Joel Embiid in Philadelphia. And of course, you're also getting Matisse Thybulle, a very nice young player and a fantastic young defender. You're getting a first-round pick and a second-round pick, and if Harden was just going to leave in free agency, I think this makes a lot of sense for Brooklyn as well. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think some of these trade proposals make sense, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic. Hope you can't go where I'm headed.